I've been thinking lately about the client approval process when it comes to video production, post-production, and I've written about this before on my blog over at clinttill.net, but I thought I would make a video about it as well. Because if you work in video production long enough and you do a lot of corporate work for clients, there comes a time when the video is complete on your end, but then you've got to submit it to your client for the approval process. Really, all of us as creatives, we've been in situations where we just can't seem to, navigate that approval maze, and it just takes longer than we anticipated. So, what are some things that we can do on our end as creatives, video producers, graphic designers, to kind of, ease this process, to make it just a little bit easier and a little bit more efficient? So that's what I want to talk about today. First, I think it's incredibly important as you enter any project, find out who the stakeholders are. If you have a client that's, a big marketing division, invariably you're going to be dealing with several different people. And, sometimes the person that you really need to be talking to, isn't in the room because they may be, a few layers up the food chain, so to speak, in the, in the marketing division. So you want to find out when that client contacts you, when you sign the contract with that client, the person that you're dealing with, is that the person who's ultimately going to give the green light on this creative endeavor, whether it's a video, logo design, whatever it is. If not, you really have to do your best and try to get the key stakeholders in the room from the beginning. And I might even specify it in my contract, who is the person that's going to ultimately sign off on this? And I think by identifying those people early, that's going to really help you on the back end. One of the other reasons why it's so important to identify those key stakeholders early in the process is that you want to try and establish a good relationship with those folks. Now, I'm not talking about a personal, hey, let's go play golf or let's go hang out after work kind of a relationship. You want to keep it professional, obviously, but you want to establish a relationship with them, a level of comfort with those clients, so that ultimately it makes that approval process easier. So if you're able to identify those key stakeholders, if you're able to sit down and have conversations with them, hopefully in person if possible, where you can kind of develop a rapport, then you kind of get to know them a little bit better in terms of their likes and their dislikes, kind of what they're going for. They understand where you're coming from a little bit better. And so there's just this level of comfort that, that you kind of reach. Now, ultimately, this is going to be a lot easier if you're dealing with a small business where maybe your client is the business owner versus a large company where there are many different teams, many different people to answer to. So I understand that this may not always be possible, but I think the more that you can help your client see you as an individual, and you in turn can see them as an individual, that you're both kind of working towards the same thing, you both want the same thing, I think will make the approval process easier once you get towards the end of the project. Another thing to try is during the initial stages of the project, after that contract has been signed and you're starting work on, the concept, script, storyboards, is drafting another agreement that you and your client sign where your client approves that concept. Because if your client is signing and approving that concept before you even begin the work, it'll be more difficult for them to come back to you once everything is complete to then ask for a lot of changes, or then to try and tell you that, no, I didn't approve this. This is not what I wanted. You can then reference back to that original creative pitch deck, that original document, and show where they signed, and then say, yeah, this is what we agreed to before the project even began. And that might help you to avoid a long approval process, at the back end of the project. The next thing I would try is to schedule some periodic creative reviews along the process. So once you have the video shot and you move into post-production, once you have that rough cut down, schedule a creative review session with those key stakeholders. Get their input early on, hey, am I on the right track? Is this kind of what you were thinking about? Does this hit the points that you want to convey in this video? Some video producers really like to get the video finalized before they present it to the client for the first time. That way, in their minds, they're putting their best foot forward. The client is seeing the video as it's going to go out the door. And, I get it. There are certainly advantages to doing that because sometimes in the rougher stages of an edit, a client might not be able to see your vision for the video exactly as you see it, or they might have questions about, hey, why is this shot super flat? Or why is this, music too loud in this section? Or why am I seeing time code at the bottom of the screen? But also, too, think about the fact that if you get too far down that road, and the first time your client is seeing the video is when you pretty much have finished with it and you've considered it locked, they may think that you're off base. They may think that you've missed some key things that you really need to include in the video, which forces you to kind of go back and undo what you did. So I think there are advantages in both approaches, but I'd love to hear kind of what's worked best for you. So, drop your stories in the comments and tell me what's worked and what hasn't worked. During creative review sessions, make sure that everyone, and I mean everyone that needs to have a say in this video, is in the room and can see it together at the same time. You definitely want those key stakeholders, the person that's ultimately giving you the green light to say yes or no. You want that person in the room, even during the creative review sessions. Because what's happened in my experiences has probably happened to you as well, where you go into a creative review and everybody's there, but there's a few people missing, and those few people are the ones that are ultimately in charge of saying yes or no to the video. So what invariably happens, you show the video, people offer up their feedback, their critiques, maybe there's some action items, some revisions they want you to make. You think everything is tied up, you're about to leave the meeting, and then somebody raises their hand and says, I really think we need to show this to this other person who's not here, and get them to, approve it before we move on. So what that does is a couple of things. First, it slows down the entire post-production process. Second, because those people who were absent, they didn't get to hear your rationale behind certain editing choices you made. They didn't get to hear feedback from other people in the room. So they're not going to have any of that context when they watch the video. So sometimes, it's happened to me, I don't know if it's happened to you, but sometimes those people who then are not there, who see the video later, they may come back and have changes that no one thought was a problem. Or they may think that everything is great when other people in the room thought there was a problem. So now there's a disconnect. And now there are people who are not in the room who ultimately can say yes or no to something, but they're contradicting other things that were said in the room by maybe some other people who also have authority to say yes or no on the project. Try dividing up the project into stages. And so as you go along, not only are you having those creative review sessions, but then once your client approves it and says, hey, you're on the right track, I like where you're going, this is great, get them to sign off on that. Have a document that says, here's the date, here's the creative review session that we had, we approve X, Y, and Z, have your client sign it, and then you're moving on to the next phase of the project. So basically what that means is you're kind of getting the client to approve things as you go, rather than trying to, navigate a very lengthy approval process at the very end of this whole project. So dividing up the project into smaller phases, getting that creative review, getting clients to sign off on that before starting the next phase can be incredibly helpful. And this becomes really important if your project is a lot more than just a single 3-minute video. I hope that some of these ideas can be helpful to you as you work on your next video production for a client. Again, drop in the comments some other ideas, suggestions, things that maybe worked for you, maybe some things that didn't. Let's all try and kind of help each other through this creative journey. As always, you can connect with me at linktree.com/ClintTill. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.